We get to learn about email in the cloud today and how UNOH did that. It's actually a very long discussion. It started several years ago, and it turned into a really nice team building exercise, as well as a great offering for our students. So we'll go through that today. So is anybody doing cloud email now? Okay. So what about looking at cloud email if you haven't already? Okay. So we've got some friendlies in the crowd. We'll kind of go through that. Hopefully I can give you some insight on the project itself and how we did things, and some of the features and benefits that we found from the educational perspective. Now, I'm a little bit biased. I've heard that from several people, and I'm reminded of how wonderful it is to be in higher education from a licensing standpoint. We do get a lot of things for free or a very discounted price. So I tried to spin some of this with the business expenses and costs, as well as the educational discounts and things like that we get. So I should mention too that you guys hopefully aren't being recorded, but I am. So they're recording this session for playback and things like that. Before I volunteered, I didn't realize that there were only going to be 2 people being recorded, not the entire conference. So I'm being recorded. My boss, who organized it, didn't mention that detail. Okay, so email in the cloud at UNOH. We'll kind of go through some of the facts. Now, these are facts about UNOH and our email environment as it stood when we began the implementation. Some of these numbers have changed a bit. As many of you know, we're in kind of dynamic organizations. We get a lot of people coming and going, and especially with the student population. So we had about 550 faculty and staff mailboxes at that time. Those were definitely the largest mailboxes that we had. Now, we were fairly conservative with our mailbox limits. Faculty and staff, by default, got a gig of storage. And I know some of you probably say, well, I got 10 times that amount in some of my mailboxes. Very true. We've heard those pains before. We've actually given people much larger storage as they need it. But that's where we started. So we had 550 faculty and staff, 14,000 plus student and applicant mailboxes. We only have about 4,600 active students at the university, but we provision applicant mailboxes at the time that they, when they apply, when they're accepted, they've completed the application process. Within 24-hour time period, their account's provisioned, and they have a mailbox. And that's how we've done things that way since, I believe, 2007 maybe. And the idea there was to get them engaged earlier so that they can communicate with our admissions team, financial aid, things of that nature. Better communication was the idea. So we had a lot of data to move. Only, despite the efforts of engaged communication, we still only had about 5,000 people who were actually using those mailboxes. So a lot of mailboxes, some of them weren't active. We've been using Exchange on campus since 2003. Prior to that, we were using QMail on Linux. I remember when I started there, a gentleman and I would talk by phone because we didn't have texting back then, and he would call me and say, hey, the email server's down again. And of course it was an email server running on an old desktop machine, the old white computer boxes. It was sitting in our server room, and it was acting as a server running Linux and QMail. Well, we grew into Exchange, and now our next generation is hosted email. So that's kind of where we were back in September. Okay, so we had hosted email on our strategic plan for quite a while. I believe we began talking about it when we implemented our last Exchange server. We talked about that in, I believe it was 2008, saying this is probably our last physical Exchange server we're going to be putting on campus. And I remember having conversations with our team about that, and they said, yeah, we sure hope so. And they were They loved working in IT, but Exchange was one of those things that was like a utility for us. It's like keeping the lights on, keeping the email on. In our world, it didn't add any value to our business. It was something we had to have to function. It was more of a utility. So some of the challenges that we were trying to overcome with the hosted email solution was the obviously what I talked about before, the limited mailbox size. The students were limited. They had 50 meg mailboxes, very small to get them started, and simply because of storage constraints at that time, we were very conservative in giving them more space. The other challenge we had was cost. If you run a business or if you participate in managing the financial operations of that business, you know that you don't like unexpected costs throughout the year. Nobody does. Well, we had one year where our Exchange environment grew so rapidly that we grew beyond the Exchange 2003 standard mail store size, and it brought our environment down to a crawl, and we were actually, our email system was down for a couple days. Well, could you imagine not having email for a couple business days? It was a nightmare for us. So we had to have consultants come in, pay thousands of dollars to get everything back online. I remember working overnight, getting a couple hours of sleep, coming back in. That's the kind of stuff that we don't like. From an IT standpoint, from a cost standpoint, we don't like unexpected expenses. The other part of that was the consulting fees. Whenever we had an upgrade coming up, we have a lot of things going on like much of you do, and we didn't have time to be Exchange experts. We were learning management system experts, we were ERP systems experts, we were networking experts, and our team is very, very good at that stuff, but we didn't have time to pick up and learn all the intricacies of upgrading an entire Exchange environment. So we would hire consultants to come in and build a side-by-side new Exchange environment for us and migrate mailboxes over. So that was a cost. The other piece of that, I guess I didn't include it in the slide, was the hardware costs. Now, a perfect time to consider email migration to the cloud is when you have a hardware refresh cycle coming up. Let's say you're about to spend 50 grand or whatever in a hardware environment to host your Exchange. That's a good time to consider, okay, well, what would this cost us if we had that same number of users and licenses in the cloud, and what's our cost recovery over how many years would we recover costs if we were able to kind of push the hardware aside. So you eliminate the need to have hardware on premises at the very base level for email, and that is a cost savings. We also have, in our world, Exchange licensing costs. You would buy the Exchange license and you would buy the client mailbox licenses. So that was a cost. In the education world, we actually were able to eliminate that particular cost because Office 365 for education is free for the base level. We're trying to get people on there. We'll go through the costs in a bit here. The expertise cost for upgrades and maintenance, those are our consultants that came in. We worked with Larry Roth. They came in and helped us out with those things. And antivirus, anti-spam software costs. You guys use anti-spam engines, appliances, or whatever? Yeah, those, as you know, those cost money to buy. The appliance itself costs money to buy, although they are offering them as virtual machines now that you can plug into a VMware environment if you want to go that route. But you still have to pay the vendor an annual maintenance fee for the spam and antivirus software. So we were able to cut that down as well. Within our existing Exchange environment, we had multiple single points of failure. We had one Exchange front-end web server. We had one Exchange mailbox store. And either one of those two things could break. And if they broke, then mail broke. And full mailboxes. And when we joked around about this in several of our administrative meetings, that the administration would send out an email to all of our students, and they would get 2 or 3 emails back that contained 100 full mailbox messages each. And so they were fairly disgusted with that. So That was one issue. Okay, so we decided, we chose Microsoft Outlook 365 over some other options for a number of reasons. I've heard people ask, well, did you guys look at Google Apps? Yes, we did. We didn't look at it heavily because we knew what our users were used to. They were used to that familiar Outlook web access interface. They were familiar with the features that Exchange offered, and if you know how difficult it can be to transition a user from one interface to a new interface, it can be a challenge. Let's think about Windows 7 to Windows 8. If you've seen that, it's kind of a big challenge. It's a visual challenge for people to accommodate. So everyone at the campus knew about Outlook Web Access. They knew how it worked, and we knew that from discussions with other schools that have been through this process, the upgrade, the migration was fairly seamless for the end user. They knew how to use it. We also had, with Office 365, we had some really, really nice free migration tools. They actually have a tool built into Office 365 that if you point that tool to your on-campus Exchange environment, it will actually draw the entire mailbox out and pop it over into Office 365, and they're good to go. It does that for them. There's no way we could have exported PST files for 14,000 plus users. It would have been crazy. So we set up migration batches, and that's how we did that using the free tools. Now you will have to make some tweaks to your front end Exchange environment to get things going, but they weren't overly difficult for us. We have for higher ed free licenses. We were looking at the predecessor to Office 365, which was Live at EDU, and that service was attractive to us at that time. And when we found out that they were rebranding with Office 365 and they're releasing more tools for free for higher education, we were very. It was an easier decision for us to make at that time. Clean migration of all mailbox content. Of all those mailboxes, those 14,000 plus mailboxes we migrated, we did not lose a stitch of email or calendars or tasks or anything. We didn't lose a bit of it. We had several people after the fact that said, hey, my stuff didn't come over, and we can go back and say, no, yeah, it did, and here's what it is, and they're like, oh yeah, I think I deleted that. So it actually worked out really, really well. One thing that we did though too, and I would recommend this during a migration if you're considering this, is we ran some scripts that would actually pull the mailbox out of Exchange and dump it to a PST file. So we did that for all of our mailboxes. We had a few steps that we go through. I'm pretty cautious when it comes to those things. You know how people love email. So we would extract all the data out into a PST, not for migration, but simply as an archive for storing that data if we were ever asked, where'd my mail go? We could bring it up, reconnect it, and say, here it is, do your thing with it. So that was one of the steps that we went through. But they all migrated cleanly. Office 365 also has built-in antivirus and anti-spam controls. I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but if you're used to having an on-premises spam solution, be aware that you might be a little bit more limited with Forefront Online protection for Exchange. It's a mouthful, but that's their antivirus, anti-spam engine. Okay, so some of the features and benefits that we realized by moving to the cloud. Some of the features: Exchange Online email. Our migration was focused exclusively on email at the front. I didn't want to pollute it with anything else. Everybody wanted to talk about other ideas and new features, and I thought that was excellent. But keep talking about those, and then we'll do them later. I think that mixing two fairly large projects at once would have been a mistake. So things that we can do later, though: Exchange Online we're using now. SharePoint Online. They have you don't have nearly the same control you have with SharePoint, but it is provided in the package. So we have that. Link Online. Is anybody using Link or familiar with Link at all? Okay, it's an instant messaging, and also it's a communication suite of products that can be used. At this point at UNOH, we're only using Link Online for faculty and staff, and it's been a really great feature. We have Link Online. We have Link for our phones. Like I'm connected right now, so I hope I don't get any IMs while we're running this presentation. But Link is on our desktops, on our phones. We communicate that way. There are also some tools in there for live collaboration, presentation, that type of thing within Link. Office web apps. If you can think of Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint being ran on a computer with none of that software installed, that's what Office web apps are. You can run Word within a browser. You can compose documents within a browser. You can compose spreadsheets within a browser. It's a really rich feature that they've added to the Office 365 suite of products. And we have not released that yet. Our plan, like I said, is to focus on email first and then work through the Office web apps later. And of course, when you release something like that, you have to offer suggestions and support and whatnot, but you can also brand it as a new service that in our case, the university has offered this new service. We get calls from students who say, I can't afford to purchase the Office suite right now. And even though they get fairly substantial discounts, at that time it may not be financially in the cards for them. So they could compose documents and things like that online with just this tool to get them by until they were able to make that purchase. The benefits of 365, automatic upgrades. When we had to upgrade Exchange before, the consultants thing. Now Microsoft will let us know ahead of time if when the upgrade is going to be made available, and then we can communicate that out to our constituents. They will let you know, from what I heard, a couple weeks early, but you can also say, hey, hold on that right now. Don't move us over yet. Don't upgrade us yet. We need to adjust some communication. But they'll eventually move you all, but you can postpone it a bit. Resilient cloud-based architecture. I learned this in a session today. Microsoft has 8,000 servers, 800 switches, 400 racks, 80 something else, and 7 data centers. So I had most of the numbers there. They have all of this infrastructure that we couldn't afford, and we wouldn't have a place to put it. And so they have these data centers all around. Their architecture is stable, and in my humble opinion, Microsoft can do email better than us. So we're going to leave that to the experts. Reduce staff support hours. We don't have to increase mailboxes anymore. We don't have to know the ins and outs of Exchange. I can assign somebody to manage our Exchange environment, and they don't have to be an Exchange expert. So you can delegate that a little bit more effectively. Simple setup for mobile devices. We found that our phones were very easy to set up for email, and we don't have to worry about tweaking any of the system settings to make that work. It just works once they've authenticated. Okay, some pricing plans, education and business. We have, I put the business ones up here first. I thought it would be good. They have different tiers of pricing. So with the mid-sized business, I think the small business, they consider 25 mailboxes and smaller. With the mid-sized business, you're looking at hosted email. Just for the email portion of that is $4 per user per month. And so if you calculate that over the course of a year, you get your annual fee for hosting that mailbox. Now, if I'm thinking through this, I would probably say, well, I can go with a GoDaddy account, right, and pay a lot less for that and have all these mailboxes and things of that nature. That's true, but the collaboration tools and the integrated authentication and the ability to have all of these apps in one place does provide a lot of value, a lot more value than you find with a regular old hosting company. So, yeah.
You mentioned integrated authentication. What are you doing there?
I'll get to that in just a
Okay.
second. It's ADFS is what it is. But yeah, the hosted email, $4 a month, and if you go with the enterprise, which is the big suite of tools, the bigger suite of tools for your end users, you're talking about $15 per user per month. What you can do though, you can say within your Office 365 portal, I've got 5 power users in my organization. I want them to have this. So you assign those licenses to those people. And I want my lighter users who just use mail and they barely know how to use their calendar, put them in the $4 bucket to keep my costs down. So if you're a manager who manages your budget here, you can predict what your costs are going to be over the course of the year based on the number of mailboxes that you've allocated within the cloud. And of course, you guys probably hate to see this stuff coming from a business standpoint. Over in education, we get the A2 plan pricing, which includes all that stuff I talked about before, and it doesn't cost us anything other than time, setup, that type of thing. But we can upgrade later, and I'm sure Microsoft will be doing a sales pitch type of stuff at some point. They haven't yet, but there are other options that we can select for our faculty and staff that might include voice features and the ability to download full versions of software and things like that if you purchase a little bit more. So I put some links up there. I'll work with everybody here at LRITA and hopefully get this presentation posted and actually maybe use those links later. Okay, some of our goals for the project, we wanted to improve our services and be able to offer new features to our students at a pace that we couldn't do by ourselves on our own. Annual support and maintenance, obviously we get a reduction in that because we can chop out our exchange licenses that we're purchasing through our campus agreement, and we can just use the cloud for that. Simplified management, we don't want to be the experts in exchange, mailbox capacity, mobile, on-premises Active Directory for authentication. This was a big thing for us. When you have over 14,000 people in your group that you have to make sure that they have credentials to log into things, that would be overwhelming to try to manage that number of usernames and passwords within the cloud. And if they were separate from their on-campus credentials that they use for everything else, that would be even more of a challenge. So we tend to run lean and mean in our department, and so we didn't want to add headcount. We wanted this to save headcount and save work in our department. So we used our existing Active Directory for authenticating users to the cloud. And I'll show you how that works in a minute here too. And then email availability, I talked about the outage we had. We want to have uptime. Microsoft guarantees 3 nines of uptime, which is 99.9%, which is far better than we could ever offer. I mean, one of our maintenance windows would blow that out of the water. We would not meet 99.9% for sure. Okay, so our planning phase, moving into our planning phase, the first thing that we did was we presented this to the President's Cabinet. Now, the President's Cabinet is at UNOH is a collection of primarily the VPs and the department heads of the different areas. They meet once a month, and so we get to present to them these projects that we're working on. So I did my spiel to them, and at UNOH we're ran by entrepreneurs, and I showed them the cost numbers and the savings, and I said, this is our upfront cost. We will recover all of this and more in the first year, and then every year after that is savings overall. And the president looked at everybody at the table. He said, anybody have any objections? And nobody said anything. He said, okay, Jeremy, get it done. So it's nice to have that type of leadership where it doesn't necessarily have to go through all these committees and things like that. Another thing we did, we found out that another school, Ohio Dominican University, was on the same implementation schedule that we were. So it was a great opportunity for us to collaborate with them and just chat. We had once every 2 weeks we chatted on the phone, and we still do that actually, to talk about some of the challenges with Office 365, what we're doing with them. So partnering with another organization or school or whatever it might be to talk about, to share knowledge was very valuable to us. And it's comforting when you hear somebody's having the same issues you are, so it's like, I'm not alone. Let's try to knock this out together. Coordinated the implementation schedule with department leaders. I actually met with each of the department heads and talked to them about this, kind of mitigating their fears of moving our communication system to a new platform. I got commitment, like a week-long commitment where we were going to do a block. Your department was going this week, and this was the day we anticipated going. We sent out emails to them, letting them know what was happening, when it was happening. So it was a complete communication effort. We wanted to keep our users in the know the whole entire time. We needed to determine our authentication scheme. That was actually pretty easy to determine, not necessarily as easy to implement. And then public calendars, public folders, and public calendars, how we use them. Those were not supported in Office 365. Microsoft has been kind of phasing them out for their different versions of Exchange. So we just stuck them in SharePoint. It's been great for us. We haven't had any issues with that. Okay, authentication. Let's talk about that. So the idea, I'm going to talk about a tool called Active Directory Federated Services here, ADFS. Now ADFS is simply a layer on top of your existing Active Directory that provides authentication from cloud apps back through your Active Directory on premises to authenticate you, to let you do what you need to do with the cloud apps. So I use the GoDaddy example. That's something where you have a separate username, separate password. You're authenticating to their systems in order to get access to that email system. With Active Directory Federated Services, you are authenticating to your systems to get access to your cloud email. One username, one password, single sign-on framework. So that's how that works. It's resilient if you implement it correctly, and it provides a foundation for future cloud-based apps. Now, in higher ed, we tend to be, I wouldn't say on the bleeding edge of technology, but we tend to be on the cutting edge. We know that a lot of our vendors are going to be saying, hey, you need your authentication systems ready for the cloud. So we have ADFS working, stable, resilient in our environment. We also have a product called Shibboleth, if you've ever heard of that. It's another authentication system, functions similar to how Active Directory Federated Services works. And so if they release an app, those are the two biggies for us. If a cloud-based organization has that type of, will work with this type of authentication, we're good to go. We have both frameworks ready to go. Okay, so how did we use it at UNOH? I'll kind of show you how it works here in a diagram next. But we separated our internal and external authentication. It sounds kind of complicated, but after you kind of get through the nuts and bolts of it, it wasn't too bad to put in place. Basically, we wanted pass-through authentication if they were on campus. If I sign on to a computer, Active Directory knows who I am. I should be able to just pass right on through to my email without having to log in again. And so that was our goal for our on-campus users. And we were able to achieve that with our internal, should be NTLM authentication, put NTFS, but had permissions on the brain at that time. The internal is NTLM. If you've ever logged in when you're on campus to something and it pops up that gray box that asks you for your username and password, you know you're on a Windows server. That's your NTLM-based authentication. If you configure your Active Directory correctly, you can trust certain sites and it won't prompt you for that. It'll just kind of pass your credentials on, you log in, and you won't have to prompt your users for username and password anymore if they are on a domain computer that's under your management scope. Outside in, you're always going to have to log in. Forms-based authentication we use for outside in. So if a student is at home, they go to get to their email, they log into our systems through a form, and then they get redirected to their email. The way that we accomplished this was, this is a Microsoft recommendation. This isn't anything magical that we did. They recommend that if you have a large number of users, you're going to want to have a fairly resilient authentication system, right? So we had two proxy servers up front And what these do, their job simply is to forward on, is to authenticate, forward on the traffic to our internal servers to make sure a person is authenticated to that system properly. And then these are the workhorses, our two ADFS servers. Those sit behind our proxy servers, and they do the authenticating through Active Directory. In order to achieve that, in order to have that resilience that we were looking for, we purchased a network load balancer from a company called Kemp Technologies, and it was within what I would consider a conservative budget number. We looked at F5 networks and those types of things. It was very, very expensive. So we went with Kemp. It's been doing a great job for us, and that load balancer basically says that I can take one of these offline and I can take one of these offline, and the load balancer says, okay, well, there's this other one here that can do the same thing. It just reroutes that traffic to the one that's online and active. Okay, so how does that actually look in our environment? I actually have a visual now that I can go through. The way that it looks is our ADFS architecture. We have Microsoft Office 365. That's where all of the mailboxes live. That's where Lync lives. That's where SharePoint lives. That's where the web apps live. Everything lives out there in the cloud. We don't need to mess with that. But before they get access to those tools, they have to get to our environment first. So the way that they do that is the load balancer actually sits in front of these two ADFS proxy servers. Remember, these are the ones that are forwarding on that traffic. And then we also have the load balancer sitting in front of our ADFS servers. So the way that works is, I know it shows two load balancers here. We actually have one load balancer with two IP addresses on it. So kind of think we just carved it up a little bit and used it for those two purposes. But the ADFS proxy knows that there's an IP for these ADFS servers, and it directs traffic to them, back to our Active Directory for the real authentication where the user accounts actually live, and that's how it all works. All of these servers, every single one of them is a virtual machine on our campus. We have, I want to say, close to 70 virtual machines, 70 servers on campus, and almost all of them are virtual. I think we're at 90% virtualization now with all of our machines. So that's how we did that. So I talked to our net admin, Chad, and said, hey Chad, this is what I need. Here's my laundry list. I need 2 front-end servers, I need 2 back-end servers, and we need to work on this load balancer together. So this was really the biggest part of getting this all together was doing the authentication. That's what took the time for us to get going. But Microsoft makes it pretty easy to get going if you've worked with any type of server stuff before. Compare this to our other one, which is Shibboleth. Shibboleth is a nightmare to get going. So this is so much easier. That's how the architecture is set up. Okay, so how do we get the word out? How do we tell everyone on campus that this big change is happening and why it's good? Well, if you're like me, you put together big posters and you have a typo in them and they go all over campus. So that was a wonderful thing, and I didn't realize it, and then it looked beautiful. I'm like, these posters look amazing. Our PR marketing department did a fantastic job. Well, one of the guys from my department comes in, he says, you know, there's a typo right there. And I go out and look at there's a typo. And it's all over campus, every building. I didn't put my name on it though. So what we did is we had a shared migration calendar with our technical support team. I put together a calendar. I talked to our frontline folks that were doing this, and I said, hey guys, we got this big thing coming up. You all know about it. You're all going to love it. And we put together a calendar with each office that we were migrating at that time. Now we're talking just our on-campus faculty and staff. Students, we moved them in big batches over the Christmas holiday break. So these were departmental ones. We put posters up all over campus. Those beautiful, beautiful, big, bold Office 365 marketing posters were everywhere. We took the same graphic, fixed the typo, and put it on our website and said, hey, here's an electronic version of the poster. We shared the implementation plan with all of our students and our employees by email on multiple occasions. What I did was, the last note there, I contacted each person by email 7 days prior to their migration. I said, hey, this day next week we're moving you. And then the day prior to, I said, okay, tomorrow we're moving you. So everybody knew all about it and in plenty of time. And I think that probably, aside from all the technical stuff that we do, we have to be really, really effective communicators with our user community. I mean, I know they tend to, our users can get upset about certain things not functioning correctly, but I think they'll give you more grace if you at least keep them in the loop with everything. And I think that's a very important step that we try to, or a very important thing we try to achieve with this project. We put announcements on our campus portal to keep people updated as well. Okay, migration time. All the public calendars went to SharePoint. Created migration batches for each department using that tool I talked about earlier, and we pushed them all over. We started it about 6 p.m. each evening, just kicked it off and let it run, and then it sent us an email when we were done and said, hey, your migration batch is done. And sometimes it would fail. Not to worry. If you start it again, it'll all go just fine. It has happened before, not a big deal. We deployed an SMTP server on campus for our line of business applications. We're talking ERP systems that send email, communication systems. That is one thing that we had to do after the fact to get the email flowing from our line of business apps. DNS entries, we migrated all the info@unoh.edu, financial aid @unoh.edu, those general use mailboxes, and then we moved our line of business apps all over. Okay, now this is how things worked when we were in the process of migrating. Now when you're moving things over, the nice thing about Office 365, it's not a light switch type of migration. You can actually run both of them simultaneously. The way that we did that is we set up our Exchange server. When Microsoft delivers these PowerShell scripts, so you don't actually have to design things, but we ran a script over here, and it migrated, or it switched the user's mailbox over, and it pointed them to their new cloud mailbox. So mail would actually come in while we were in transition. It would come from an external mail system through the firewall, and it would hit our on-premises Exchange server, and it said, oh, this user mailbox has already been migrated. So then it shoots them back out to the cloud, or if it hadn't been migrated, it just delivers it to their mailbox. So that's how we were able to achieve the staged migration approach of the batches of mailboxes. Okay, so how does it route after migration? It's simple. It just goes to the cloud. It just arrives in the mailbox, and then the users log in to go grab it. It was a monumental occasion. We actually decommissioned our Exchange server. It marked the new generation of email on campus. We put those things to bed. They were done, out the door, and our network admin was more than happy to unrack the equipment and get it out of his rack and call it done, because none of us had to mess with it anymore. At least the Exchange portion of it. MX records, if you've done email, you have to make some DNS entries. And we own the zone. We still own the zone. We maintain the zone in DNS. We just have entries within there that had to be entered to make the email flow properly. And then, of course, we decommissioned Exchange and gave it a fond farewell and said goodbye. Okay, now the next slide talks about some of our pain points. You can't talk about the good without some of the bad. Okay. So next slide, hopefully you'll recognize this picture. Any of the super geeky Facebook type of people might recognize this picture. Does anybody know the name of that cat?
Grumpy Cat.
Grumpy Cat is the nickname, but what's the real name of that cat? It's Tartar Sauce. Can you imagine naming that cat Tartar Sauce? Okay, but anyway, this whole thing about it's definitely Grumpy Cat. It's the cat that everybody posts. He's always got mean and nasty things, and anything that happens that's bad, he thinks is funny and good. So I put him on the pain point slide for us. Some of the issues that we had that we found with Office 365 after we had implemented was the lack of granular spam controls. We use Sophos email filtering appliance. We're very happy with that. It was as simple as moving a slider switch. Do you want your spam to be more lax or more restricted? And we had that thing cranked up to 10. We didn't want anything coming in that we thought was bad, because we tried every other level, and everybody still called and said, I'm getting junk in my mailbox. So we lost that. You do have some spam controls. You can mark some domains as good, some as bad, senders as good, whitelist, blacklist senders, things like that. You can do all that type of thing, but in our experience, we did not have those types of controls that we were familiar with. So we got kind of spoiled before, and now we're put back here. There were increases in junk mail. Microsoft, though, does a good job flagging them as junk mail, and they will end up in your junk mail folder if you're using Outlook or Web Access. It's just that folder will fill up a little more frequently. I've seen that happen, and I'm hoping that that part of the system is enhanced. Again, not deal breakers, but they are things that will happen to be prepared for. And what I found personally is it's often difficult to track a message. I mean, you can track them to a certain degree, but we were used to our spam firewall system, and we were able to track them pretty easily. And this one, you have to look in two places. There's the mailbox place where you can look to track them, and then there's the spam firewall place where you can look to track the messages. And they leave a little bit to be desired. Let's just kind of leave it at that. Mailbox limits can cause issues with bulk mailings. Now, this isn't the mailbox size limit. We haven't had any issues with that. But Microsoft does have limitations in place, and for business users, you guys actually get a much larger, more generous limit than higher ed does at this point. We're limited to 2,500 messages from one mailbox to individuals per day. Sounds really great, right? Who sends that much mail? Well, when your alumni department sends email messages to all of our alumni on a giant alumni list, it doesn't take long for you to hit that limit. And your SMTP server says, whoop, hit my limit for the day, wait 24 hours. I think it's 10,000 for business users, so you get a little bit more leeway. One way around that is to put your own non-Microsoft SMTP server in place, or you can purchase a service that does that type of thing for you. I personally think that we should be using, and I'm kind of lobbying for this internally, I think we should be using like a Constant Contact or MailChimp or something like that, because those are far better distribution list management tools than sending it all through Mailbox and Office 365. They're just not very good for that purpose. And that's the reason that's there is it's a rate control limitation to protect your instance of Exchange from being blacklisted. And Microsoft has good relationships with the agencies that blacklist people, so they know how to stay off those lists. And this is one of the things they use to stay off the blacklists. And again, the SMTP relay server, we did put that in place, but the SMTP relay server that sends the mail from our line of business applications, it actually connects through a single Office 365 account. And that single Office 365 account is the one that hit the limit. So the SMTP server effectively was rendered useless at that point. Now, we did work around that because we're like, if this happens again. What we did is we created 2 more additional email relay accounts, and so if one got filled up for any reason, we would get the alerts, and then we would switch it to the other account, and then it'd start flowing through just fine until it hit its limit. And if we needed to, we never have, but we could switch it to the other one, and then they got 24 hours each rotation. So it was a little issue, but again, you can get rid of that altogether, and I would highly recommend that you do by going with the Constant Contact or MailChimp or something like that. So that takes us about to time, and I have like a minute or a few if you want to stick around for questions.
What did you use Shibboleth for?
We use Shibboleth for DreamSpark. Originally, we wanted to do DreamSpark so our students could download applications, Microsoft Office applications, and then we were going to expand it to Atomic Learning for some of our video tutorials, and then we were going to expand it to the library. I'm trying to remember the name of it. The shared library resources where you get online and look up resources and deliver to the library. Yeah, we were going to use it for that. But we found that Shibboleth it's a bear to get going. It's like config file city, and I'm sure
Is it not smooth yet, right?
it's working. but I don't trust it. My big thing is I don't trust it because it's not resilient like ADFS is. So I'm hoping these other places will kind of catch up and say, we do ADFS, and I'll be like, let's move over that way. Okay.
Did you do any training for the users at all?
Training for the end users. We actually, oddly enough, we offered to do individualized trainings for our on-campus users, but for our students, they had to log. The login process was just a username and password box, and we sent screenshots out and things like that, and it was so similar to what they'd had before that we have not had. I was pleasantly surprised at the lack of calls about email after the migration. We communicated it all, but they said, it's Outlook, I use Outlook. It's fairly simple. But we did offer that on an individual basis, but not too many took us up on that. Okay. Yeah.
Is Outlook Web Access the interface for it, or
It's the only one that we would use. If you had a different mail client software, you can use that. Our users and I personally like Outlook, the thick client, the fat client Outlook on my desktop. I like it because I can connect to SharePoint, I can connect to my lists, I can connect to my email, I can view everything in one spot, and I really, really like Outlook for that. And I told our end users when I did kind of the presentation to them about the change, I said, I don't recommend changing from Outlook. I don't want to do that to you guys. You like it, keep using it. It's not going anywhere. So almost all of our offices still use Outlook on the desktop, and they connect to Office 365. And if you've ever had to set up special use mailboxes like info ad or something like that, it's much easier in Office 365. You grant the user access to that mailbox, and it automatically pops into their Outlook form on their desktop. Works out really well for us.
Put that with a power cable and
Yeah.
so we need to thank Jeremy for his